Steam and Sorcery, a transdimensional adventure starring Phineas Frakture and Sir Vlishginath, the Cleansing Light. Episode 6, written by Joseph Gatch and Daniel Mitchell. Read by Fentriss O. Moore. This isn't real. It must be an illusion, Phineas said aloud, shaking his head stubbornly as if he didn't believe what he saw. All around them, what appeared to be the vast infinity of space stretched out, the two of them standing on a lonely platform, floating listlessly through the void without any sense of urgency or direction. Soaring comets streaked the sky, a faint rumble heard as a star went supernova trillions of light years away. A burst of cosmic light showered the area where they stood. "Oh, it is," Vlishginath said, patting Phineas reassuringly on the shoulder. Illusion is one of Mysteer's favorite forms of sorcery. Illusion and evocation. The lore master can explain it much better than I, but essentially it's— "No, I mean this isn't really magic," Phineas shouted, turning and looking frantically around him as if he dropped something. Watching him for several seconds in confusion, Vlishginath began to scan the ground as well as he spoke. "I'm sorry, but what are we looking for?" "The device that's projecting this image onto the ceiling. I know it has to be around here somewhere," Phineas said, scanning the massive stone columns bearing flickering torches. Contemplating the professor for several moments, Vlishginath calmly followed behind him, watching as Phineas's frustrations grew with each passing moment he was unable to find the device that didn't exist. "Perhaps it is time you consider the possibility that what you're seeing is not able to be explained with your science, Frakture." "Don't be absurd," Phineas scoffed, testing torch scones to see if they yielded secret passageways and cursing them silently when they didn't. "I would point out that when you first arrived, your proclamations of science were absurd to us as well. Is it so hard to believe that in a world so different from your own, there are things that must simply be accepted?" Pausing, Phineas considered Vlishginath's words for a moment, until finally he looked around him, nodding in response. "Take me to him. I want to meet the man. I'll prove this once and for all." In response, a voice coming from nowhere and seemingly everywhere at once was heard, bursting into a fit of laughter. "Prove what once and for all, Frakture?" the voice proclaimed, going silent and waiting for a response. Phineas looked about frantically as he shouted back at the void that this is all smoke and mirrors, and that you are a con artist. "A con artist, am I? A con artist he calls me," the voice shot back, rife with mock indignation. "We just want to talk, Mysteer. Never mind the professor. He's not from around here," Vlishginath said, taking his best diplomatic tone, though he knew it to be futile. For several long moments, there was naught but silence, and it was just as Phineas was about to call out once more that the walls to the invisible room in which they stood slammed abruptly into place, a ceiling falling down on top of them and closing them in. On the wall opposite the door they came in was a long, red-carpeted hallway, lit by a long row of burning emerald green flames hovering in place. Motioning with a nod of his head, Vlishginath took the lead, Phineas following closely behind. On and on they marched for several minutes, until finally they reached the end of the hallway. It was there that they encountered a dead end, the smooth marble stone that comprised the walls surrounding them on three sides. Phineas smirked, inspecting the marble as he spoke in a derisive tone. For being so supposedly powerful, his architectural prowess leaves a great deal to be desired. Glancing around them for a moment, Vlishginath turned back the way they had come, giving Phineas a nudge and motioning for him to follow. "Come on, this way." "What? But we just came from there," Phineas exclaimed, making no effort to hide the irritation in his voice. "After all this, he'd better be able to tell us where this Roderick is, like you claim he can." Chuckling, Vlishginath nodded in agreement. "I won't be happy either if all of this has been for naught." It was just as they were reaching what should have been the room they had entered the hallway from that they spotted them. A large set of double wooden doors with an elaborate jagged M decorating the center. Stepping up to the doors, Phineas inspected them carefully, glancing behind him as if he didn't trust his own eyes again. "A moving hallway. Clever trick, but I'm still not convinced." There, floating in the air on his back, as if he were drifting down a peaceful river, the mad sorcerer Mysteer circled around his illustrious throne, sitting atop a three-tiered dais. The throne room itself was unfathomably expansive, the walls and the floor extending so far out that they disappeared in the horizon before one could see where they intersected with the rest of the room. "I assume you brought me a present, with what it being my birthday?" Mr. said flatly, turning his head to the side and folding his hands behind it for support. Clad in his usual black leathers, with innumerable buckles, his blood-red cape trailed lazily behind him as he drifted through the air. Casually dangling his right leg over his left, he wore knee-high black leather boots with a pronounced heel that buckled up the shin. His golden blonde hair, done in loose spikes that hung from his head, framed his gaunt, angular face. His mismatched green and blue eyes leveled on Vlishginath and Phineas in turn. Phineas activated his kicker jets and rose up to meet Mystere face to face. The two circled each other, staring the other down. Science and sorcery. "You still equate the arcane to simple parlor tricks, do you?" Mystere asked his guest. "Everything can be explained with science," Phineas retorted, "even charlatans." Coming to an abrupt halt, Mystere held his hands out to his sides, upon which showers of arcane bolts shot up into the sky, exploding in a massive display of fireworks. The sorcerer smiled at Phineas as if daring him to explain. Phineas, in turn, pulled some magnesium from his pocket belt, tossed it in the air, and ignited it with the match. Lightning arched across the room in response. Phineas then drew a Tesla pistol and fired it around the room as well, causing Mystere to duck while the illusory disguised walls were scorched with electricity. Mystere growled, and with a simple wave of his hand, a large beast of a quadrupled feline sprung forth from nothingness below him, letting out a vicious roar before darting into the wall and vanishing completely. Phineas reached over behind Mystere's ear, and a flood of coins spilled over the floor. "Enough of your mockery," Mystere snarled, his eyes flashing dangerously. "I am the most powerful sorcerer of all time, and I do not answer to the likes of you." "Yeah, and I'm a Chinese ether pilot," retorted Phineas. "Can you help us find this Roger guy or not?" Letting out a wordless howl, Mystere threw his arms out to his sides, his hands outstretched to the sky as he drew upon the arcane forces, swarming in like flooding waters, the pull on the fabric of reality as the mad sorcerer called upon its energies became visible, Mystere's entire body igniting in a blue arcane flame as his eyes glowed blue and green respectively. "Let's see your science do this, Professor," he said, his voice growing deathly calm as ominous rumbling noise began to fill the room. "Oh, hell," Vlishginath said, his jaw dropping as he looked up. Centering roughly 100 yards above Mystere, an enormous cyclone of blue arcane flame, crackling with white-hot energy, slowly began to touch down, spitting off excess bolts of raw arcane power that erupted in massive blast columns all about the room. The winds all around them began to pick up as well, and the closer the cyclone grew to touching down, the greater Vlishginath had to struggle to remain standing, while the mad sorcerer himself giggled in maniacal delight and remained stoic amidst the winds. "Frakture, stand down, or you'll get us both killed," Vlishginath shouted, staggering out of the way as a fire column erupted next to him. Phineas, having lost his patience with the both of them, and with total disregard for his own personal safety, weaved around Mystere's pyrotechnics until he was face to face once again with the sorcerer. Looking him straight in the eye, as Mystere grinned devilishly back, Phineas said with feigned lack of interest, "You like big wins? Here's a demonstration of basic science and chemistry, courtesy of eating foreign foods." There was a low rumbling of flatulence from Phineas, and Mystere suddenly closed and reopened his eyes rapidly, as if from a burning sensation. "Now give it up. You're starting to bore me, and you're scaring King Arthur down there." Without another word, Phineas dropped back to the floor next to Sir Vlishginath. Mystere, gagging from the sudden attack on his senses and puzzled by the lack of interest of his audience, almost immediately forgot about the fiery vortex he was summoning. In response, the vortex dissipated, and the room returned to normal as Mystere's throne collapsed in on itself before exploding into a flock of black birds flying in all directions. Descending gently to the ground, Mystere leaned in closely to Phineas, furrowing his brow and glaring impudently at him. "What do you mean, you're bored?" "I mean that I have better things to do than play dueling parlor tricks. Your friend, Roderick, has something of mine, and if he's not careful, he's going to end up dead, along with a few hundred people, or sheep, depending on where he may be at the time. Mystere let out an overly dramatic scoff, falling back into a floating position with a motion that came naturally to him. He folded his hands behind his head once more as he hovered 5 feet off the ground. Why should this concern me? For one thing, he's your friend, started Vlishginath. And from the looks of things around here, you don't have many, Phineas interjected. Vlishginath looked over at the professor with a wince and shake of his head in silent warning not to make further mention of that. Besides, he spoke up, he might be the greatest escape artist and thief to ever live, but if he misuses the professor's device, he won't be around to get a second chance at it. Though some people, a lot of people, might rest easier if he were blown to smithereens, Phineas added. Whatever that means, Vlishginath said, motioning towards Mystere with a nod. And we both know that you would rather have him around in one piece. Mystere screwed his face up, but behind his mask of indifference, Vlishginath knew his words had gotten through. Finally, the mad sorcerer rolled his eyes, speaking in a begrudging tone. Does your repulsive companion have to come with us? It is his bomb, responded Vlishginath. Mystere shuddered at the mere memory of Phineas's flatulence. Very well, but he stays downwind. Vlishginath looked confusedly at Phineas, who just smiled to Mystere but decided not to press the issue of what had transpired above. As they began to exit Mystere's home, Phineas pulled a woven tube from his pocket belt and tossed it to Mystere. Happy birthday, by the way, he said nonchalantly. Mystere caught the tube and turned it over quizzically. What is it? It's called a Chinese finger puzzle, and it comes from a land far, far away. It's a trick. Figure it out, O mighty sorcerer. Cautiously sticking his index fingers in either side, it wasn't long before Mystere realized his fingers were stuck. His eyes widening in panic, the mad sorcerer let out a horrified scream, flailing his hands about wildly as he tried to disengage them, until finally a sudden blast of arcane flame incinerated the finger trap. Mystere carefully inspected his hands and wiggled his fingers to make sure they still functioned properly. Watching on in confusion, it wasn't until Phineas doubled over in uncontrollable laughter that Vlishginath caught on and began to chuckle. Mystere frowned at being made a fool of and flew off ahead of them a ways. And since when did you become a king? He demanded, pointing a finger at Vlishginath from up in the air. For a moment, Vlishginath tilted his head quizzically at Mystere and was beginning to shake it when the sorcerer continued. You could have at least invited me to your coronation. Opening his mouth to speak in protest, Vlishginath stopped with it hanging half open as he looked at Phineas. When the professor merely shook his head and shrugged his shoulders innocently, Vlishginath narrowed his eyes. If we make it back, I'm letting Maximus chase you around the training yard.